Welcome, dear readers, to a story that transcends time and social barriers. Today I bring you a narrative that transports us to Spain in 1878, where the heart of a brave woman defied the conventions of an aristocratic society. In the arid fields of Andalusia, under the relentless sun and among abandoned vineyards, a love will flourish that will test destiny itself. Have you ever felt that true love can conquer any obstacle, that a single glance can change the course of two lives forever? This is the story of Carmen and Rafael, two souls destined to find each other in a world that conspired against their happiness. From dusty fields to golden salons, from the deepest despair to the most radiant hope, I invite you to discover how love can defy even destiny. I would love to know where you're joining us from today. From what corner of the world are you reading this story? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and leave your like if this story moves you as much as it moves me to tell it. Your support means everything to continue sharing these narratives that touch the soul. 1878. Andalusian Plains, Monterrey Estate, Spain. The Andalusian sun fell mercilessly upon the parched earth, creating golden mirages that danced on the horizon. Carmen Esperanza Morales stood tall among the rows of withered olive trees, wiping the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, weathered by work. Her dark eyes, deep as wells of ancient water, contemplated the fields she had cultivated for the past 3 years with the tenacity of one who has no choice but to resist. The ruined house where she lived with her 2 small children stood as a melancholic reminder of better times. The broken tiles let through threads of golden light that filtered down to the packed earth floor, where Jose, 8 years old, helped his sister Isabel 5 mend a rag doll with scraps of worn fabric. The rumble of horse hooves broke the evening. Quiet. Carmen raised her eyes, squinting against the sun's glare. A procession approached, raising a cloud of reddish dust, 4 men on horseback, dressed with the elegance that only aristocracy could afford. At the front rode a young man of distinguished bearing, whose presence seemed to defy the landscape's aridity with his urban freshness. Don Rafael de Mendoza, Marquis of Monterrey, stopped his horse a few meters from the house. His blue eyes, the color of the morning sky, settled on Carmen, with a mixture of surprise and something more indefinable. He had expected to find an old submissive peasant, not this young woman, whose dignity emanated from every gesture despite her patched dress and calloused hands. "Are you the one who inhabits this property?" asked Rafael, dismounting with the natural grace of one born into abundance. Carmen didn't respond immediately. Her eyes studied him with the caution of one who has learned that powerful men rarely bring good news to the dispossessed. Finally, she nodded with a slight inclination of her head. "I am Carmen Morales. These are my children, Jose and Isabel." Her voice was firm, without a trace of the submission Rafael had expected to hear. "I am the Marquis of Monterrey," he announced, expecting to see in her eyes the fearful recognition his title usually provoked. But Carmen looked at him with serenity, as if measuring not his social position, but the character of the man before her. "I have come to notify you that you must abandon this property," Rafael continued, feeling a strange discomfort under the firmness of her gaze. "You have 3 days to collect your belongings." The words floated in the heat-laden air like dry leaves, in the wind. Jose dropped Isabel's doll and instinctively approached his mother, while the little girl clung to her skirt with wide eyes. Carmen remained motionless for a moment that seemed eternal. When she spoke, she did so with a calm that unsettled Rafael. "May I know why, Lord Marquis?" "For 3 years we have worked these lands, we have cared for them when no one else did. We have converted abandonment into sustenance." Rafael felt something stir in his chest, a discomfort he couldn't name. He had expected to find her crying, pleading, but this woman confronted him with a dignity that disturbed him. "The property will be sold," he responded, more brusque than he intended. "A Catalan businessman wishes to establish modern vineyards here. And us, where will we go?" Carmen's question contained no plea, but a genuine curiosity about whether he had even considered the answer. Rafael remained silent, because the truth was he hadn't. In his world, peasants were figures in accounting books, not faces with their own stories. But Carmen's face, framed by chestnut hair that the sun had gilded at the tips, was etched in his memory with disturbing clarity. 3 days, he repeated, mounting his horse again. It's sufficient time. As he rode away at a gallop, Raphael couldn't help but look back. Carmen remained in the same place, erect as a statue of salt, with her children on either side. There were no tears in her eyes, only a resolution that troubled him throughout the journey back to the estate. That night, in the opulence of his mansion, Raphael found himself thinking about eyes that had not humbled themselves before his power, about a voice that had spoken without fear, about a woman who had transformed his eviction into a question about his own humanity. What was it about Carmen Morales that disturbed him enough to steal his sleep? Chapter 2. The Audacious Visit. Dawn painted the sky in pink and golden tones, but Carmen hadn't slept. She had spent the night awake, not lamenting her fate, but forging a plan that would have horrified any woman of her condition. While her children still slept on the pallet they shared, she washed her face with cold water and combed her hair, carefully braiding her chestnut hair into a crown that gave her an air of ancient solemnity. She put on her only decent dress, navy blue, which had been her mother's. It was worn but clean, and she had mended it with such skill that the seams looked like deliberate embroidery. It was the dress she had married, in the one she had buried her husband in, the one she had faced every crucial moment of her life in. "Mama, where are you going?" asked José, waking up at the sound of her footsteps. "To speak with the Lord Marquis." Carmen responded naturally, as if it were the most normal thing in the world for a widowed peasant to request an audience with aristocracy. José, with the premature wisdom of children raised in difficulty, frowned. "Is it good that you go, Mama?" Carmen knelt before him, taking his face in her hands. "Sometimes, my son, when the world closes one door to us, we must have the courage to knock on another. Take care of Isabel. I'll return before midday." The path to the Monterey estate stretched like a white ribbon under the morning sun. Carmen walked with firm steps, ignoring the curious glances of the workers she encountered on the path. Her presence there was an anomaly that some considered audacity, others madness. The estate rose majestically among centennial cypresses, its whitewashed walls gleaming like pearls against the blue sky. The gardens, carefully tended, contrasted brutally with the aridity of the surrounding lands. It was an oasis of privilege in a desert of need. The gatekeeper, an older man with grey moustaches, looked at her with bewilderment when she requested to see the Marquis. "Do you have an appointment, madam?" "No," Carmen responded simply. "But I have something important to discuss with his lordship. It's about the property he plans to sell." The gatekeeper hesitated. The determination in Carmen's eyes was so intense it seemed to radiate its own authority, alien to social protocols. After a whispered exchange with another servant, Carmen was led through corridors adorned with tapestries and ancestral portraits, until reaching an office that seemed like a temple to power, noble woods, gilded leathers, leather-bound books that had never known hands other than aristocratic ones. Raphael looked up from some documents, and his expression of surprise was so genuine it was almost comical. He rose slowly, as if he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. "Mrs. Morales," he murmured. "How—" "Good morning, Lord Marquis." Carmen greeted him with a minimal curtsy, just enough to comply with formalities. "I have come to request an explanation." Raphael gestured nervously toward a chair upholstered in green velvet, but Carmen remained standing. In her simple dress, surrounded by such opulence, she didn't seem diminished but more authentic, as if she were the only real thing in a theatrical setting. "An explanation," Raphael repeated, still processing the audacity of her presence there. "Yes, for 3 years, Lord Marquis, those lands have been abandoned. For 3 years no one cared for them except us. We have repaired fences, planted where we could plant, cared for what could be cared for, and now when we have finally managed to make something of that desolation, you appear to evict us." There was something hypnotic about the way Carmen spoke. Without excessive humility, but without insolence. It was as if she simply laid out facts that any reasonable person should consider. Raphael found himself observing her hands while she spoke. They were hands that knew work, weathered by sun and earth, but they moved with a natural grace that any society lady would have envied. "The world changes, Mrs. Morales," he responded, but his voice had lost the authoritative firmness of the previous day. "Business requires—" "Business," Carmen interrupted, and for the first time her serenity cracked slightly. "Is that what we are to you, obstacles to business?" Raphael remained silent. The question had struck him with the force of an uncomfortable truth. In his world, people like Carmen were indeed figures moved from one side to another according to the conveniences of capital. But she was there, flesh and blood, questioning the coldness of that logic with her very presence. "Mrs. Morales," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I understand your situation. But the decisions I make cannot be based on what? Lord Marquis, on humanity." The question hung suspended between them like a slowly falling leaf. Raphael realized that this woman had accomplished something no noble, no businessman, no politician had ever achieved, making him question not just a specific decision but the entire edifice of privileges upon which his life had been built. Could one encounter change the perspective of an entire existence? The sound of wheels on gravel and the neighing of horses interrupted the tense silence that had settled between Raphael and Carmen. Through the office window, one could see an elegant, black carriage with golden inlays stopping in the main courtyard. Raphael visibly paled. "Doña Mercedes," he murmured more to himself than to Carmen. Carmen noticed the immediate change in his posture. From the relative comfort of their conversation, Raphael shifted to the rigidity of one preparing to play a role. He approached the window and confirmed his fears. Mercedes Vasquez descended from the carriage with the studied grace of one educated to be contemplated. Mercedes was beautiful in that perfect cold way, cultivated by aristocracy, porcelain skin that had never known direct sun-blonde hair, arranged with elaborate perfection, ivory silk dress that cost more than everything Carmen had owned in her life. But it was her expression that truly defined her, the calculated smile of one who always obtained what she desired. "You must leave," Raphael told Carmen abruptly, his voice acquiring a formal tone she hadn't heard before. Immediately, Carmen observed him transform before her eyes. The man who moments before had shown glimpses of doubt and humanity disappeared behind the mask of the perfect aristocrat. It was like watching someone dress not in clothes, but in a completely different personality. "Just like that?" asked Carmen, but her voice contained no bitterness, only a deep sadness. "One moment we're people talking and the next I'm a nuisance that must be hidden." The observation hit its mark with surgical precision. Raphael avoided her gaze, heading toward the door with rigid movements. "The circumstances are complicated," he murmured. "No, Lord Marquis," Carmen replied, following him. "The circumstances are simple. What's complicated is choosing who we want to be." Before Raphael could respond, the door opened and Mercedes entered like a gust of expensive perfume and social expectations. Her gaze immediately settled on Carmen, evaluating her from head to toe with the speed of one trained to identify threats. "Raphael, dear," Mercedes said with a melodious voice, but Carmen detected the steel edge beneath the sweetness. "I didn't know you had visitors." Raphael cleared his throat nervously. "Mercedes, allow me to present Mrs. Morales. She lives on one of the properties that will be sold." Mercedes's smile became even brighter and therefore more dangerous. "Oh, how interesting. And has she come to discuss the terms of her relocation? How considerate of her." Carmen immediately understood the game. Mercedes had not only marked territory, but had reduced her presence there to an act of condescending charity. It was a masterstroke of social humiliation. "I have come to discuss justice, Madam," Carmen responded calmly. "But I see I have chosen the wrong moment." Mercedes laughed a crystalline and cruel sound. "Justice is a very relative concept, don't you think? What is just for some may be completely inadequate for others." Raphael remained silent, and his silence was more eloquent than any words. Carmen looked at him one last time, searching in his blue eyes for some trace of the man she thought she had glimpsed moments before, but she found only the empty gaze of the aristocrat fulfilling his class's expectations. "You're right, madam," Carmen said, addressing Mercedes but looking at Raphael. "Justice is relative. Some measure it by convenience, others by conscience." She made a minimal curtsy and headed toward the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "Good day, Lord Marquis. I hope you find peace in your decisions." When the door closed behind her, Mercedes approached Raphael with feline steps. "What a peculiar woman," she commented, placing a gloved hand on his arm. "I hope she's not causing you unnecessary problems." Raphael didn't respond, but his eyes remained fixed on the door through which Carmen had exited. Something in his chest had tightened in a way he couldn't explain, as if he had lost something valuable without realizing he possessed it. Was it possible that the real exile was staying in a world of appearances while authenticity walked toward the door? Chapter 4. The Midnight Visit. The Andalusian night stretched like a velvet mantle embroidered with stars. Raphael had tried to sleep, but sleep eluded him like a wild animal that won't be domesticated. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Carmen's face, her unshakable dignity, the sadness she had tried to hide when Mercedes humiliated her, the way she had kept her head high even in defeat. He got up and dressed in silence, making a decision he didn't fully understand himself. He personally saddled his horse, avoiding waking the stable hands, and rode toward the abandoned lands where Carmen lived. The full moon illuminated the path with silver light that transformed the arid landscape into something mystical and supernatural. The ruined house stood like a melancholic spectre against the starry sky. A dim light filtered through the cracks. Of the shutters, Carmen was also awake. Raphael tied his horse to a half-dead olive tree and approached slowly. Through a crack, he could see the interior. Carmen sat beside a candle, mending clothes by the trembling light. Her children slept curled up in a corner, sharing a blanket too small. The scene had a painful beauty, an intimacy that made him feel like an intruder in a world he didn't belong to. When Carmen looked up, she didn't seem surprised to see him there. It was as if she had been waiting for him. "Can't sleep, Lord Marquis?" she asked in a low voice so as not to wake the children. Raphael removed his hat, suddenly feeling conscious of how inappropriate his presence there was. "No," he admitted. "There are things that disturb sleep more than insomnia." Carmen left her sewing and came out of the house, carefully closing the door behind her. Under the moonlight, her face acquired a ghostly pallor that made her seem like an apparition from other times. "What brings you here?" she asked, but there was no reproach in her voice, only curiosity. Raphael remained silent for a moment, searching for words for something he didn't know how to name. "This afternoon, when you left, I felt as if I had committed a betrayal, but I didn't know against whom." Carmen began to walk slowly toward a solitary fig tree that stood near the house. Raphael followed, maintaining a respectful distance. "The most painful betrayal is always against oneself," she said. "When we deny what we know is right to please others." "You speak as if you know that feeling." Carmen turned toward him, and in her eyes was a depth that overwhelmed him. "Do you think I don't know it? I married a man I didn't love because my family needed security. I fulfilled all the duties of a perfect wife, while my heart withered like plants without water. When he died, I felt guilt, because along with the pain, there was relief." The confession floated between them like a shared secret. Raphael found himself telling her things he had never verbalized. "I too will marry without love," he murmured. "Mercedes is appropriate. Our families have arranged everything since we were children. She will be a perfect marchioness, and I will be the husband society expects me to be, and the man you want to be." The question hit him like a punch to the stomach. He realized it had been years since he'd asked himself that. Perhaps he had never really asked himself that. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been so busy being who others expect me to be that I've forgotten who I really am." Carmen leaned against the trunk of the fig tree, looking toward the starry sky. "Do you know what the difference is between you and me, Lord Marquis? You have the power to choose your destiny and don't use it. I don't have that power, but I haven't stopped choosing who I want to be within the circumstances I was given." "And who do you choose to be?" "A woman who doesn't bend, a mother who protects her children, a person who looks life straight in the face no matter what it throws at her." Raphael felt a sudden urgency to get closer to her, to touch her moonlit face to confirm she was real, and not a vision born of his dissatisfaction. He took a step forward, and Carmen didn't retreat. Carmen. He murmured her name for the first time, and it sounded different on his lips, more intimate than any noble title. She raised her gaze to him, and in her eyes, Raphael saw reflected something that both terrified and excited him, the possibility of being truly seen not for what he represented, but for who he was. Raphael slowly raised his hand, bringing it close to Carmen's face. She didn't pull away, but didn't move closer either. They remained thus suspended in a moment that seemed to exist outside of time, when Isabel's crying abruptly returned them to reality. Carmen immediately stepped away, heading toward the house. "You should leave," she said without looking at him, "and not return." But when Raphael mounted his horse and began to ride away, he turned one last time. Carmen was at the door, holding Isabel in her arms, watching him leave. And in that gaze was something that would haunt him for many more nights. Was it possible he had found exactly what he didn't know he was looking for in the most unexpected place? Chapter 5. The Spreading Poison. Don Aurelio had been serving tables at the village tavern for 40 years, and in all that time had perfected the art of invisibility. Men talked in front of him as if he were part of the furniture, and confidences spilled along with the wine-forming puddles of secrets he absorbed meticulously. He was the unofficial keeper of the village gossip, and that dawn he had witnessed, something worth its weight in social gold. From his hiding place among the bushes, he had seen the Marquis arrive on horseback, had witnessed the conversation under the fig tree, had observed the almost magnetic tension between the two bodies approaching, without touching. And now, as the rising sun painted the hills, pink Don Aurelio savored the delicious prospect of being the bearer of the most scandalous news that had crossed through the village in decades. By the time he served the first coffee of the morning, half a dozen men already knew the details. The Marquis of Monterey, engaged to the aristocratic Mercedes Vasquez, had ridden at dawn to the house of the widow Carmen Morales. They had talked alone under the moon. They had been so close that a sigh would have made them touch. "Of course I'm not saying anything," Don Aurelio murmured while cleaning glasses that were already clean. "But a marriageable man doesn't ride at night to a widow woman's house to discuss the weather." The words spread through the village like oil on water. Each conversation deformed them a little more, adding morbid details born from collective imagination. By midday, according to circulating versions, Raphael had been at Carmen's house until dawn. By afternoon, there had been witnesses to passionate kisses under the moon. Carmen felt the change in atmosphere before fully understanding it. Women who habitually greeted her with neutral cordiality now averted their gazes when they crossed her on the road. Men observed her with a new kind of interest, uncomfortable and speculative. Children who played with José and Isabel were called by their mothers with sudden and unconvincing excuses. It was Doña Soledad, her neighbor, and only real friend in the village, who finally told her the truth. The elderly woman arrived at her house at sunset, walking faster than her arthritic legs. "Generally allowed. Carmen, daughter," she said without preamble, "you need to know what's being said in the village." As Doña Soledad related the rumors, Carmen felt the ground become less solid beneath her feet. Not from shame. She had done nothing to be ashamed of, but from the terrible certainty that the consequences of that nocturnal conversation would be much more serious than she had imagined. "But who saw them?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Don Aurelio has been bragging all morning that he witnessed the romance of the century," Doña Soledad responded with disgust. "That man would turn a butterfly's flight into an army invasion if it gave him importance." That night, when the children were already asleep, Carmen found a paper slipped under her door. The handwriting was shaky, clearly disguised, but the message was crystal clear. "Whore, leave the village before we force you to do it. A marchioness cannot have peasant rivals." Carmen folded the note carefully and stored it in the drawer where she kept the few important possessions of her life: her mother's wedding ring, a letter from her dead husband, a lock of hair from each of her children when they were babies. And now this proof that the world could be even crueler than she had imagined. The next day, José came home with dirty clothes and a split lip. "What happened?" asked Carmen, examining his face with trembling hands. "Miguel Herrera said ugly things about you, Mama. He said words I don't want to repeat. I told him he was lying, but he kept saying those things, and then..." Carmen hugged her son against her chest, feeling how the consequences of a nocturnal conversation spread like ripples in a pond, reaching even her little ones. "Did we do something wrong, Mama?" asked Isabel, who had been listening with wide eyes. Carmen looked at the innocent faces of her children and made a decision that tore her heart. In her world, a woman could be destroyed for much less than what had happened between her and Raphael, and if she was destroyed, her children would be dragged down with her. How could she protect those she loved when love itself had become the weapon of their destruction? Chapter 6. The Calculated Manipulation. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Monterey estate. Mercedes arrived early without prior notice, her face composed in a mask of aristocratic concern that couldn't completely hide the fury burning in her green eyes. Raphael received her in the main salon, surprised by the unusual nature of her morning visit. Mercedes never altered her social routines without an important reason, and her presence there so early and without a chaperone suggested that something serious had disturbed her perfectly ordered world. "Raphael, dear," Mercedes began without the usual preambles, "I have learned of certain rumors circulating through the village." Raphael felt his throat go dry. He had underestimated the speed with which gossip traveled in a small community, especially when it involved prominent figures. "Rumors?" he asked, though his tone betrayed that he knew exactly what Mercedes was talking about. Mercedes approached him with measured steps like a cat cornering its prey. "About your nocturnal visit to that woman, the widow, Carmen Morales." The way she pronounced Carmen's name, loading it with contempt, made Raphael feel sudden irritation. But he contained himself, because he knew Mercedes was right to be worried. In their world, appearances were more important than realities. "I went to verify the state of the property," he lied, hating himself for how easily the words came from his lips. Mercedes laughed, a crystalline and dangerous sound. "At midnight alone, Raphael, please don't insult me with such obvious explanations." She sat in one of the velvet armchairs, carefully arranging the folds of her sky-blue silk dress. "What worries me is not what you did or didn't do," she continued. "What worries me is what people believe you did. And in our world, dear, perception is the only reality that matters." Raphael approached the window, contemplating the perfectly tended gardens of the estate. Everything in his life had been like this, perfect, ordered, predictable. Until a woman with sad eyes and unshakable dignity had appeared to question all that perfection. "What do you suggest I do?" he asked, though he feared the answer. "That you cut any relationship with that woman immediately," Mercedes responded without hesitation. "That you accelerate her departure from the property, and that you do something public that demonstrates your commitment to me and our future wedding." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Dowager Marchioness of Monterey, Raphael's mother. Doña Esperanza was a 60-year-old woman who had dedicated her life to maintaining family prestige with the tenacity of a general defending a fortress. Her presence imposed immediate silence in the room. "Good morning, Mercedes, dear," she greeted with the perfect smile she had perfected during decades of social life. "Raphael, I need to speak with you." Mercedes excused herself with studied elegance, but before departing she gave Raphael a look that contained both a warning and a threat. When they were alone, the Dowager Marchioness went straight to the point. "Is what's being said in the village about your nocturnal visit to that peasant woman true?" Raphael knew that tone. It was the same one his mother had used to direct every aspect of his education, molding him from childhood to be the perfect aristocrat she had designed. "Mother, Don't give me explanations, Raphael, give me solutions." Her voice was cold as the marble of the statues adorning the estate's entrance. "Our family has maintained its reputation intact for 300 years. I will not allow a moment of confusion to stain it now." And if it weren't confusion, the question escaped Raphael's lips before he could contain it. The Marchioness looked at him with a mixture of surprise and horror, as if her son had blasphemed in a cathedral. "Are you suggesting you have feelings toward that woman?" Raphael didn't respond, but his silence was more eloquent than any confession. "Raphael," his mother continued, and now her voice contained something like panic, You will marry Mercedes Vasquez next month, as has been planned. For years. You will have children who perpetuate our lineage, and you will live the life your social position requires. That is not a suggestion. It's an order. That afternoon, while Raphael rode alone through the limits of his lands, he found himself involuntarily heading toward the area where Carmen lived. From a hill he could see her house in the distance and distinguish her figure working in the small garden she had miraculously created in that arid land. Part of him wanted to gallop there, take her in his arms and flee with her and her children to some place where social conventions couldn't reach them. But another part, the part that had been molded during 29 years of privilege and responsibility, kept him motionless on that hill, observing from a distance a happiness that seemed impossible to reach. Was it possible that the real price of maintaining his social position was renouncing forever the possibility of being happy? Chapter 7. The Forced Exile. Carmen woke with her heart racing, torn from sleep by a nightmare where her children were pursued by a crowd of nameless faces. The reality that greeted her was almost as terrifying as the dream another note had been slipped under her door during the night. Second warning. If you don't leave, your children will pay the consequences of your shamelessness. No one protects whores in this village. Her hands trembled as she read the words, but not from fear for her own safety. It was the threat toward Jose and Isabel that froze her to the bone. For 3 years she had managed to protect them, create a small, safe world amid uncertainty. Now that world was crumbling because of something that hadn't even really happened. She watched her children sleep in the dawn's penumbra. Jose had new bruises he had tried to hide, and Isabel had begun wetting the bed, a sure symptom that stress was affecting her, despite being only 5 years old. Carmen made a decision that tore her soul, but which she knew was the only option left to her. During the following hours, she packed her few belongings with mechanical movements. There wasn't much to take: some clothes, the sentimental objects she kept in the drawer, the children's few toys. An entire life fit in 2 bundles of worn fabric. "Where are we going, Mama?" asked Jose, watching her with those eyes too wise for his age. Carmen knelt before him, taking his small hands in hers. "We're going to a place where we'll be safe, my son. A convent in Cordoba where the sisters will give us refuge." "For how long?" Carmen couldn't hold his gaze when she responded, "I don't know." In reality, she did know. The plan she had forged during that sleepless night was clear and terrible. She would take religious vows. It was the only way to guarantee protection for her children and ensure that her presence could never again harm someone who mattered to her more than he should matter. Doña Soledad arrived at dawn to say goodbye, bringing a small bundle with provisions for the journey. "You don't have to do this, daughter," she told her with tears in her eyes. "Rumors pass, people forget. Not when they involve a Marquis, Doña Soledad. And not when there are powerful people who need me to disappear to protect their interests." The 2 women embraced in silence, sharing the sadness of those who understand that sometimes survival requires sacrifices that break the heart. The journey to Cordoba was made in a merchant's cart, who agreed to take them in exchange for the few coins Carmen had saved. During the long hours of the journey, while the Andalusian landscape stretched under the relentless sun, Carmen allowed herself to remember one last time the conversation under the fig tree, the way Raphael had pronounced her name, the electricity she had felt when he had been about to touch her face. Then deliberately she closed that part of her heart, like one closes a book that has finished being read. The convent of Santa Clara rose on the outskirts of Cordoba like a fortress of peace, its whitewashed walls reflecting the golden light of sunset. The Mother Superior, a woman with a severe face but kind eyes, received Carmen with the understanding of one who has seen many women arrive fleeing from worlds that had become uninhabitable. "You can stay as long as you need," she told her. "Your children will be well cared for here, and if you decide to take vows, well, God knows the hearts that seek refuge in Him." That night, in the small bare cell assigned to her, Carmen knelt before the simple wooden crucifix hanging on the wall. She didn't pray asking Raphael to search for her. She prayed asking for strength to forget him. Meanwhile, 20 kilometers away, Raphael arrived at an empty house. The windows were closed, There was no smoke coming from the chimney. There were no signs of life. On the ground he found one of the threats Carmen had received crumpled and forgotten in her haste to leave. Reading those cruel words, Raphael felt a fury he had never experienced. But along with the anger came something worse, the terrible understanding that his presence in Carmen's life had been the catalyst for her destruction. How could he have been so selfish as to seek her company without considering the consequences? She would have to pay Thakazurafen to Takus chapter 8, the unveiling of truth. The fury that had taken hold of Raphael was a new force in his life, an energy that transformed his usual aristocratic composure into something dangerous and determined. For years he had been the perfect gentleman, the noble who never raised his voice, who resolved conflicts with diplomacy and money. But the image of Carmen fleeing because of threats his presence had provoked awakened in him a thirst for justice that surprised him with its intensity. His first stop was the village tavern, where Don Aurelio shone as always among the tables, serving wine and rumors in equal parts. When Raphael entered, silence fell over the establishment like a heavy blanket. The peasants stood automatically removing their hats in a gesture of respect that seemed more fearful than reverential. "Don Aurelio," said Raphael, and his voice had an edge no one had heard before. "I need to speak with you." The old tavern keeper approached nervously, drying his hands on his stained apron. "Of course, Lord Marquis, whatever you need." "I understand that you were the one who saw certain events, and that you had the kindness to share that information with the entire village." Don Aurelio began to sweat visibly. That is, people have a right to know when..." "When what?" Raphael interrupted, taking a step closer. "When a man converses with a woman, when two people talk under the stars." "But Lord Marquis, you are engaged and she is a widow, and at those hours of the night, and that gives you the right to turn a conversation into a scandal, to cause a woman and her children to have to flee their home." The question floated in the air, laden with tobacco smoke and fear. Don Aurelio looked nervously at the other men, seeking support he didn't find. "I didn't know that. That is, I didn't think that..." "Exactly," Raphael said with a cutting voice. "You didn't think, but someone did think, someone who knew exactly what consequences your gossip would have and who deliberately encouraged it." Raphael had grown up among political and social intrigues. He knew how to recognize when a scandal was organic and when it had been carefully cultivated. The rumors about him and Carmen had spread too quickly, had been too detailed, had found too much receptivity to be casual. "Who suggested that you share what you had seen?" he asked directly. Don Aurelio paled even more. "No one suggested anything, Lord Marquis. Don Aurelio," Raphael interrupted, and now his voice contained a veiled threat. "You have lived on my family's lands for 40 years. Your tavern exists because we allow it. Your livelihood depends on our benevolence. And now an innocent woman has had to flee because of your irresponsible tongue. Do you really want to continue lying?" The silence extended like a frozen lake. Finally, Don Aurelio broke. It was Miss Mercedes," he murmured so low that Raphael had to lean in to hear him. "She came here 2 days ago asking if there had been unusual events and related to you. When I told her what I had seen, she told me it was my civic duty to inform the village about the character of the people living among them." Raphael felt the world sway slightly. Mercedes, his fiancée, the woman who had sat in his salon feigning concern about rumors she herself had fed. And the notes, the threats Mrs. Morales received. Don Aurelio shook his head vigorously. "I don't know about that, Lord Marquis, I swear by the Virgin. I only commented on what I had seen." Raphael left the tavern with long, furious steps. Everything was beginning to make sense. Mercedes had come to the village, not because she had heard rumors, but to create them. She had manipulated Don Aurelio, had orchestrated the scandal, and then had appeared at the estate pretending to be the offended party. His next stop was inevitable. He rode to the Vasquez house with the determination of a man who had finally found an enemy worthy of his anger. He found Mercedes in the garden, cutting roses with silver scissors, dressed in white like a virginal maiden from a fairy tale. When she saw him arrive, she smiled with the calculated sweetness he now recognized as her most dangerous weapon. "Raphael, dear, what a pleasant surprise," she said, approaching with roses in her hands. "Have you come to apologize for your behavior yesterday? I have come to ask you about your visit to Don Aurelio's tavern." Mercedes's smile froze slightly, but she recovered with admirable speed. "I don't know what you're talking about, dear." "Mercedes," Raphael said, and his voice was dangerously calm. "Don't insult me by feigning innocence. I know it was you who orchestrated this entire scandal, who manipulated that old man to spread the rumors, who turned an innocent conversation into a cause for exile." Mercedes dropped the roses, and for the first time since he'd known her, Raphael saw her true face, cold, calculating, ruthless. "Innocent," she laughed. "Do you call it innocent to spend the night with a peasant widow while engaged to me?" "I didn't spend the night with her. We talked for half an hour in view of anyone who wanted to look." "But you wanted to spend the night with her, didn't you?" Mercedes's eyes shone with a malice that disturbed him. "I saw how you looked at her in your study. I saw how you changed when she was present, and I decided it was better to eliminate the temptation before you did something truly stupid." The confession was so direct, so devoid of remorse, that Raphael was momentarily speechless. "Do you know where she is now?" he finally asked. "At the convent in Cordoba, perhaps," Mercedes responded with a cruel smile. "That's where women who have lost all hope of having a respectable future usually take refuge." How could he have been blind for so many years to the true nature of the woman he had planned to spend the rest of his life with? Chapter 9. The Race Against Time. The determination that had guided Raphael to the Santa Clara convent transformed into uncertainty when he found himself before the whitewashed walls of the sacred place. He had ridden for hours under the relentless sun, changing horses twice in his urgency to arrive before it was too late. But now, contemplating the serenity of the religious building, he wondered what right he had to burst into the refuge Carmen had sought. The porter sister who opened the heavy wooden door looked at him with curiosity. It was unusual for a gentleman of his evident social position to appear without prior notice at a convent, especially with the urgency radiating from each of his movements. "I need to speak with Carmen Morales," Raphael said without preamble. "It's urgent." "Are you family, sir?" Raphael hesitated. In legal terms, he had no relationship with Carmen that gave him the right to see her. But in terms of the heart, I am someone who owes her a very important apology." The sister studied him with eyes that had seen many men arrive seeking redemption or forgiveness. "Wait here. I will speak with the Mother Superior." Raphael was led to an interior courtyard where an ancient fountain murmured water melodies. Over stone, it was a place designed for contemplation, and while waiting, Raphael found himself reflecting on the irony of seeking Carmen in a place where she had come to forget him. When Carmen appeared, Raphael felt his breath catch. In just 3 days, something fundamental had changed in her. She wore a simple grey dress, her hair was gathered under a white veil, and there was in her eyes a resignation that terrified him more than any fury could have. "You shouldn't have come," Carmen said without approaching, maintaining physical distance as a reminder of the spiritual distance she had chosen to create between them. "I had to come," Raphael responded. "I had to tell you the truth about what happened, about who was really responsible for the threats you received." Carmen looked at him with tired eyes. "It doesn't matter who was responsible. The result is the same. Your presence in my life brought consequences my children didn't deserve to pay. Carmen, please listen to me." "Here they call me Sister Hope," she interrupted. "Carmen Morales was a woman who lived in the world. That woman no longer exists." The words hit Raphael like physical blows. He stepped closer and Carmen instinctively retreated. "Have you already taken vows?" "Tomorrow," she responded. "The ceremony will be tomorrow at dawn." "No." The word came from Raphael with such force it frightened the doves drinking at the fountain. "Carmen, you can't do this. Not because of my fault. Not because of something we didn't even do." For the first time, Carmen's composure cracked slightly. What alternative do I have? Return to the world, so other powerful men can decide I'm a threat to their interests, expose my children to more humiliations, more dangers. Marry me. The words came out before Raphael had time to think them, but once spoken, he realized it was exactly what he had come to say. Carmen looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Have you gone mad? You are engaged to a woman of your class, of your world. I am a widowed peasant with 2 children. I'm no longer engaged, Raphael said. I broke the engagement this morning, when I discovered Mercedes had orchestrated the entire scandal to drive you from my life. Before Carmen could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. Mercedes had appeared at the courtyard entrance, accompanied by her father, Don Cristobal Vasquez, and 2 other men Raphael recognized as influential aristocrats from the region. What a touching scene, Mercedes said, with a sweet voice dripping venom. The noble Marquis declaring his love to a servant in a convent. Poets will write ballads about this. Raphael turned toward her with eyes burning with fury. How dare you follow me here? Oh dear, Mercedes responded. I didn't follow you. I came to witness your return to sanity, because that's what's going to happen, isn't it? You're going to realize how ridiculous this situation is and return home with me. Don Cristobal stepped forward, addressing Raphael with the authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. Raphael, son, I understand you're going through a crisis. It's normal for young men to have confusions as before marriage, but this has gone too far. There is no confusion, Raphael responded, straightening. Only clarity. For the first time in my life, I see things exactly as they are. Mercedes approached Carmen with feline steps. "And you, dear," she said to her, "do you really believe a man like Raphael can be happy with someone like you? Do you seriously think love can conquer differences of class, education, destiny?" Carmen looked at Raphael, and in her eyes was a silent question. That challenged him to respond not only with words, but with his entire being. Was it possible that love was strong enough to overcome not only social conventions, but also the weight of one's own past? Chapter 10. The Declaration of War. The convent courtyard had transformed into a battlefield where 2 irreconcilable worlds faced each other. On one side, Mercedes and her father, backed by centuries of social canons. On the other, Raphael and Carmen, united by something that transcends hierarchies, but which the world refused to recognize as valid. Raphael felt that the moment had come to choose not only between 2 women, but between 2 versions of himself. The Marquis perfectly molded by family expectations, or the man who had begun to awaken in conversations under the stars. "Mercedes," he said, and his voice resonated in the courtyard with a firmness that surprised even himself. "I have come here not for a temporary crisis, but to correct the biggest error of my life." Mercedes looked at him with eyes that began to show real concern. She had calculated that Raphael would eventually return to the family fold, chastened by the impossibility of his romantic fantasy. She hadn't considered the possibility that he would really choose to destroy his social future for a peasant. "Raphael, dear, you're making a mistake you'll regret your entire life," she said, modulating her voice to achieve the tone of loving concern she had perfected over years. "Think of your family, your position, everything you represent." "I've thought about that for 29 years, Raphael responded, "and I've realized that representing something I don't believe in is the cruelest form of living death." He turned toward Don Cristobal, addressing the patriarch with the respect due his age but without an ounce of submission. "Don Cristobal, for years you and my mother have planned my life as if it were a chess game. You have moved the pieces according to your social and economic strategies. But people are not pieces, and the heart doesn't obey strategies." "The heart," Don Cristobal murmured with contempt, "is a luxury that men of our position cannot afford. We have responsibilities, Raphael, toward our families, toward our class, toward the social order that has given us everything we have." "And what have we given in return?" Raphael asked. "What have we created with all our privileges except more privileges for ourselves?" He approached Carmen, who had remained silent during the exchange, observing with the painful fascination of one witnessing their own destiny being decided by others. "Carmen," Raphael said, taking her hands in his despite the presence of observers, Yesterday I thought my greatest fear was losing my social position. Today I've realized that my greatest fear is spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had had the courage to choose happiness over convenience. Mercedes approached with quick steps, and for the first time since Raphael had known her, her mask of perfection completely cracked. Happiness, she laughed bitterly. Do you call this happiness, destroying your future for a romantic fantasy, becoming the laughingstock of all Andalusia? I call happiness the possibility of being honest with myself, Raphael responded without taking his gaze from Carmen. The opportunity to build something real instead of playing a role others wrote for me. Mercedes then looked at Carmen with a fury that no longer bothered to disguise. And you, do you really believe this can work? Do you think a Marquis can be happy living in poverty with you, that your children will be accepted in a world that will always see them as bastards of an inappropriate union? Mercedes's words found their target in Carmen's deepest fears. For days she had visualized exactly those consequences, Raphael regretting his decision. When the reality of life without privileges became evident, her children forever carrying the stigma of a mother who had fished above her station. She's right, Carmen murmured, releasing Raphael's hands. This is impossible. No, Raphael said vehemently. What would be impossible is spending the rest of my life pretending I haven't found exactly what I didn't know I was looking for. He turned toward Mercedes and her father, straightening with a dignity that emanated not from his title, but from his decision. I formally declare my marriage engagement to Mercedes Vasquez broken. I renounce any economic or social arrangement this engagement may have implied, and I free myself from the expectations my class and family have placed on my shoulders. The silence that followed this declaration was so profound that one could hear the murmur of water in the fountain, the whisper of wind among the orange trees in the convent garden. Mercedes remained motionless for a moment, processing the reality that she had lost not only a fiancé, but the entire future she had meticulously planned. When she spoke, her voice had an edge that could have cut diamonds. Very well, Raphael. Choose your romantic poverty, but don't come looking for me when you realize that love doesn't feed, doesn't clothe, and doesn't protect from social contempt. As Mercedes and her entourage left with the offended dignity of rejected aristocracy, Raphael turned toward Carmen. Now, he said, the choice is yours. You can take vows tomorrow and be Sister Hope forever. Or you can give me the opportunity to show you that some things in this world are stronger than social conventions. Was it possible that the human heart was capable of betting everything on a happiness the world considered impossible? Toys Tulbinad, Chapter 11. The Sacred Decision. The convent courtyard had recovered its sacred silence after Mercedes's tempestuous departure and her retinue. Only Raphael and Carmen remained facing a decision that would irrevocably change the course of their lives. The words they had just exchanged floated in the air like promises and threats at the same time. Carmen walked to the central fountain, submerging her hands in the fresh water. It was a gesture she had acquired during her days at the convent. Touching water calmed her, reminded her that even in moments of greatest turbulence, some elements remained constant and pure. Do you know what accepting your proposal would mean? For me, she asked without looking at him. It would mean renouncing the only real security I've known in years. It would mean betting my children's future on something the entire world considers madness. Raphael approached slowly, conscious that every word he said in the next few minutes would have the weight of destiny. I know I'm asking you to trust in something that has no guarantees, he responded. But I also know that the security you've sought in this convent is a form of living death. You weren't born to be a shadow of yourself. Carmen turned toward him, and Raphael saw in her eyes the struggle between fear and hope. For 3 years I've protected José and Isabel from everything. From hunger, from cold, from despair. I've built walls around us to keep safe the little we had. And now you appear asking me to tear down those walls for what? For love? For the possibility of living instead of simply surviving, Raphael responded. For the opportunity to teach your children that there are things worth risking for. Carmen remained silent for a moment that seemed eternal. When she spoke, her voice had a different quality, as if something deep had changed within her. Do you know what my first thought was when I saw you yesterday at your estate? It wasn't fear for my situation. It was sadness for yours, because I saw in your eyes a man who had everything the world considers valuable and who was nevertheless completely empty. Raphael felt something move in his chest, an emotion so intense it surprised him. And what do you see now? Now I see. A man willing to lose everything for the possibility of finding himself. And that is the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. Carmen removed the white veil she had worn as a sign of her intention to take vows. Her chestnut hair fell over her shoulders, liberated, and with that symbolic gesture she seemed to also free herself from the refuge she had sought in resignation. But if we're going to do this, she continued, if we're going to defy the entire world for our right to choose our own destiny, we have to do it completely. Without reservations, without regrets, without looking back. Raphael took a step forward, shortening the distance between them. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you're willing to renounce your title for me, I'm willing to renounce my fear for you. At that moment, something magical happened in the convent courtyard. It wasn't a supernatural miracle, but a completely human two people decided that their right to happiness was more important than the opinions of the world surrounding them. Raphael took Carmen's hands in his, and this time she didn't pull away. Carmen Esperanza Morales, he said, with a solemnity that transformed his words into an oath, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, she responded. And that simple word contained all the courage she had accumulated during years of adversity. Yes, I will marry you. It was at that moment when Mercedes reappeared at the courtyard entrance, now flanked by a stern-looking priest and 2 judicial officials. Her face showed a triumphant smile that chilled the blood. How romantic, she exclaimed. But I'm afraid there's a small legal problem. You see, Raphael and I are bound by a marriage contract signed by our parents when we were 18. A contract. That includes very specific economic penalties for unilateral breach. Raphael paled slightly, but didn't release Carmen's hands. Those contracts can be annulled, he said. They can, Mercedes conceded with venomous sweetness, but the process takes months, sometimes years. And meanwhile, any marriage you contract will be considered invalid. Your children, dear Carmen, would be legal bastards. The blow was calculated with surgical precision. Mercedes had found Carmen's only real vulnerability, her love for José and Isabel. But before Carmen could respond, Raphael stepped forward. Then there will be no civil marriage, he declared. We'll marry here now by the church. A marriage that no earthly contract can invalidate. He turned toward the priest who had come with Mercedes. Father, can you perform a marriage ceremony right now? The priest, an elderly man with a kind expression who had evidently been deceived about the purpose of his presence there, looked at Mercedes with growing disapproval. If both contracting parties are free before God and wish to unite in sacred marriage, yes, I can do it. Was it possible that love could find a way to triumph even when all obstacles seemed insurmountable? Chapter 12. The Impromptu Wedding. The announcement of Raphael's decision to marry immediately had transformed the atmosphere of the Santa Clara convent. What had begun as a silent refuge for Carmen had become the setting for a wedding that would defy all social conventions of the era. The Mother Superior, a practical woman who had seen many human storms in her decades of religious service, took control of the situation with the efficiency of a general organizing a campaign. If you're going to marry on sacred ground, she declared, you'll do so with the dignity befitting the sacrament of marriage. Mercedes had left furiously with her companions promising legal and social consequences that would make Raphael regret his decision for the rest of his life. But her threats seemed distant compared to the urgency of preparing a ceremony that neither of the protagonists had planned, but both desired with surprising intensity. Carmen found herself being attended by the convent sisters with a solicitude that moved her to tears. Sister Magdalena, a young woman who had taken vows after an impossible love of her own, had appointed herself coordinator of the wedding preparations. We have the wedding dress donated by the Countess of Aguilar 5 years ago, she announced, while examining Carmen's figure with expert eyes. We've never used it because the brides who arrive here are usually fleeing from marriage, not heading toward it. The dress was a creation of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with delicate lace on the sleeves, and a cut that would favor Carmen's figure without excessive ostentation. When she tried it on, Carmen saw herself transformed. Not into an aristocrat, that would never be possible or desirable, but into the most beautiful version of herself. Meanwhile, Raphael had sent urgent messages to his estate, asking them to bring José and Isabel to the convent. He couldn't imagine marrying their mother without her children being present. He had also requested that Doña Soledad and some trusted workers from his lands come. If he was going to begin a new life, he wanted to be surrounded by genuine people, not aristocrats, fulfilling social protocols. The arrival of José and Isabel at the convent was a moment of pure joy. The children, who had been confused and sad about the sudden changes in their lives, lit up upon seeing Raphael. During the days of preparation for the property sale, he had been kind to them, and now his presence represented stability amid chaos. "Are you really going to marry Mama?" asked José with the frankness of 8 years old. "If she accepts me, and if you accept me?" Raphael responded, kneeling to put himself at the child's height. "Because a man who marries a mother also marries her children." Isabel Shire approached slowly and placed her small hand on Raphael's cheek. "Will you be our papa?" she asked, with the seriousness of a small judge. "I will be the man who loves and protects you as if you were my own children," Raphael responded. "Does that seem good to you?" Isabel's spontaneous embrace was her answer. The greatest challenge came in the form of an unexpected visitor. The Dowager Marchioness of Monterey had ridden from the estate upon learning of the events. Her arrival at the convent created a stir among the sisters, unaccustomed to receiving visits of such high social rank. Raphael received her in the same courtyard where he had declared his love for Carmen. His mother wore the black mourning dress she had adopted after her husband's death, and her expression was pure granite. "Raphael," she said without preamble, "I have come to make one last attempt to make you see reason." "Mother, please." "No," she interrupted. "Let me speak. For 29 years I have worked to secure your future, to maintain our family's honor, to give you everything a man of your position should have. And now you're going to destroy all of that for what? For a romantic fantasy." Raphael looked at his mother, truly seeing for the first time in years, not the implacable authority that had directed his life, but an older woman who had sacrificed her own happiness to fulfill social expectations. "Mother," he said softly, "did you love my father?" The question took her by surprise. For a moment her mask of authority cracked, and Raphael saw in her eyes something he had never seen: vulnerability. "Love," she murmured, "was a luxury that women of my generation couldn't afford." "Then let me have what you never could have," Raphael asked. "Let me choose happiness over duty, even if it's just once in our family's history." The Dowager Marchioness remained silent for a moment that stretched like a century. When she spoke, her voice had lost its authoritative edge. "Do you really love her?" With an intensity that frightens and liberates me at the same time. "And does she love you?" Enough to risk the only security she had known in years. The Marchioness nodded slowly, as if finally understanding something she had been refusing to see. Then she said, "I suppose it's time for this family to learn what it means to choose the heart over convenience." Was it possible that even the most rigid traditions could bend before the force of authentic love? Chapter 13. The Ceremony of Hearts. The Andalusian sunset painted the sky in golden and crimson tones when the small chapel of the Santa Clara convent filled with a congregation that would have been unthinkable under any other circumstances. In the simple wooden pews sat side by side rural aristocracy and peasants united by amazement at a ceremony that defied all the unwritten laws of their society. Raphael waited before the altar, dressed in his finest suit, but had left all decorations and symbols of his rank at the estate. That night he was not the Marquis of Monterey, he was simply a man who had chosen love over convenience. Beside him, José and Isabel occupied positions of honor, dressed in new clothes the sisters had hastily sewn during the afternoon. When the chapel doors opened and Carmen appeared on the arm of the Mother Superior, A reverent silence fell over the congregation. The ivory silk dress transformed her natural beauty into something almost ethereal, but it was the light in her eyes that truly made her radiant. She didn't walk toward the altar like a nervous bride, but like a woman who had made the most important decision of her life and was at peace with it. The Dowager Marchioness, seated in the first pew, observed the scene with a mixture of amazement and something that could have been nostalgia. For decades she had attended aristocratic weddings where the bride and groom united for convenience, power, and money. But she had never witnessed a ceremony where love was so palpable it seemed to transform the very air. Father Antonio, the convent's elderly priest, began the ceremony with words he had pronounced hundreds of times, but which that afternoon acquired special meaning. Brothers in Christ, we have gathered here to witness the sacred union of Raphael and Carmen, two souls who have chosen to love each other beyond the differences the world considers insurmountable. When it came time for vows, Raphael took Carmen's hands in his and spoke with a voice that reached every corner of the chapel. Carmen, I promise to love you, not only in abundance, but especially in scarcity. I promise to build with you a world where our children can grow knowing that true love exists. I promise to be your companion in difficult decisions, your refuge in storms, and your celebrant in joys. Carmen responded with a firm voice that didn't tremble despite the magnitude of the moment. Raphael, I promise to accompany you on this path we choose together regardless of the difficulties we encounter. I promise to be your equal in love, your support in doubts, and your home when the world becomes hostile. I promise to build with you not just a marriage, but a family where Jose and Isabel can call you father with pride. When Father Antonio pronounced the final words, I declare you husband and wife before God and this congregation, something magical happened in the chapel. It wasn't just the union of two people, but the creation of a new form of family that defied conventions but affirmed the supremacy of love. The kiss that followed was soft, almost reverent, but contained a promise of passion and companionship. That would last decades. Jose and Isabel immediately approached, embracing the new couple in an image that would capture the essence of what had just been born, not just a marriage, but a genuine family forged in the conscious choice to love against all odds. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. The convent sisters had prepared a simple dinner in the refectory, and Doña Soledad had brought homemade wine she had been saving for a special occasion. There was no orchestra or elaborate dances, but there was something more valuable, the authentic happiness of people who had witnessed the triumph of love over conventions. The Dowager Marchioness approached Carmen during the celebration, taking her hands with a gentleness that surprised all present. Welcome to the family, daughter, she said, and forgive me for taking so long to understand that true honor isn't in maintaining traditions, but in having the courage to create new ones when the old ones no longer serve. When night fell completely and guests began to retire, Raphael and Carmen found themselves alone in the convent courtyard where it had all begun. The stars shone with an intensity that seemed to bless their union, and the fountain's murmur provided soft music for their first moments as spouses. "Are you afraid?" asked Raphael, embracing Carmen under the starry sky. "I have expectation," she responded. "For the first time in years, I have expectation of what the future can bring us. And if we're wrong, if love isn't enough to overcome all the difficulties that will come." Carmen smiled, and in her smile was a wisdom gained through years of survival and resistance. "Then we'll be wrong together." And that's already more than most people can say about their marriages. Was it possible that true triumph wasn't avoiding difficulties, but facing them with someone who had chosen to be by your side come wind or high water? Shui. Epilogue. 3 years later. 3 months after the wedding at the Santa Clara convent, the Monterey estate had experienced a transformation that went far beyond physical changes. It was true that Raphael had sold half the lands to establish a fund that would guarantee Jose and Isabel's education, and that he had converted the disused wings of the mansion into housing for the farm workers. But the deepest change was invisible. The house had stopped being a museum of privileges to become a real home. Carmen had adapted to her new life with the same grace with which she had faced poverty. She didn't try to imitate aristocratic ladies, but created her own version of what it meant to be the lady of an estate. She worked side by side with the women in the fields when necessary, taught the workers' children to read in the afternoons, and had transformed the ornamental gardens into productive vegetable plots that fed the entire farm community. Raphael discovered that his happiness hadn't diminished with the reduction of his fortune. On the contrary, he had found a satisfaction in direct work that he had never experienced when simply managing family investments. He rose before dawn to personally supervise the farm work, and his hands, once soft from aristocratic inactivity now, showed the honest calluses of productive work. Jose and Isabel had flourished in their new environment. The boy had lost the cautious expression he had developed during years of uncertainty, and now ran through stables and fields with the confidence of one who knows himself loved and protected. Isabel had adopted Raphael with the natural ease of small children, and followed him around the house calling him Papa Raphael, with a naturalness that moved Carmen every time she heard it. One spring afternoon, while Raphael and Carmen walked through the vineyards they had planted together, an unexpected visitor arrived. Mercedes appeared in her carriage, but this time without the aristocratic entourage that had characterized her previous appearances. She had lost weight, and her dress, though still elegant, lacked the ostentation of her usual attire. Raphael and Carmen received her in the main courtyard of the estate, curious to know the purpose of her visit. "I have come to apologize," Mercedes said without preamble, addressing mainly Carmen, "and to confess that during these months I have come to understand something that before seemed impossible to me." Carmen observed her attentively, searching in, her eyes for some trace of the malice that had characterized their previous encounters, but she found only weariness and something that could have been painful wisdom. "What have you understood?" Carmen asked with genuine gentleness. "That real happiness is more valuable than apparent happiness," Mercedes responded. "My marriage to the Count of Seville has been exactly what my family expected, appropriate, advantageous, socially perfect, and completely empty." Raphael and Carmen exchanged a glance. There was no triumph in their eyes, only compassion for a woman who had discovered too late the price of choosing convenience over the heart. "For months I have observed from a distance your experiment," Mercedes continued. "I expected it to fail to prove to everyone that I had been right about the impossibility of romantic love, but instead I have seen something that has forced me to question all my certainties." "What have you seen?" Raphael asked. "I have seen a man who changed power for purpose and who became more powerful in the process. I have seen a woman who elevated an aristocratic estate without losing an ounce of her authenticity. I have seen a family built on love that is more solid than many built on conveniences." Mercedes approached Carmen, extending a hand that no longer wore aristocratic gloves. "Carmen, you were wiser than me from the beginning. You chose the insecurity of love over the security of calculation, and you have won something. I will never have the certainty that your husband is with you because he really wants to be with you." The two women shook hands in a gesture that symbolized not only forgiveness, but mutual recognition of two different ways of navigating a world that didn't facilitate decisions of the heart. When Mercedes left, Raphael and Carmen continued their walk through the vineyards that now stretched green and promising under the Andalusian sun. In the distance they could see Jose teaching Isabel to care for the smaller plants, and the sound of their laughter arrived carried by the warm wind. "Do you ever regret it?" asked Carmen while contemplating the landscape they had transformed together. Raphael stopped and embraced her, looking toward the horizon where golden hills stretched as far as the eye could see. "What would I regret? Finding finally the person with whom I want to build all my futures. Learning that true nobility isn't in titles, but in actions. Discovering that happiness isn't what others expect of you, but what you build with your own hands." Carmen smiled, resting her head on Raphael's shoulder. "Sometimes I think we found each other, not despite our differences, but precisely because of them. You needed to learn to value the simple and authentic. I needed to learn to believe I deserved something more than simply surviving. And our children will learn from an early age that true love is possible, that it's worth risking for, and that the strongest families are those that are consciously chosen, not those accepted out of obligation." As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in pink and golden tones, Raphael and Carmen returned toward the house, where José and Isabel waited for them for dinner. It was a simple domestic scene without the grandeur of aristocratic banquets. But it contained something no social pomp could provide: the authentic happiness of people who had chosen to build together a life based on love, mutual respect, and shared hope. In the years that followed, the Monterrey estate would become a model of progressive management, where workers and owners shared not only responsibilities, but also the benefits of common work. José would grow to become a man who would value both education and honesty, and Isabel would become a woman who would know she deserved to be loved for who she really was, not for what others expected her to be. And Raphael and Carmen would age together, building each day the decision to continue choosing each other, demonstrating with their lives that love that defies destiny is not only possible, but is the most beautiful way to write one's own story. Love had triumphed not because it was easy, but because they had been willing to work every day to keep it alive and authentic.